Welcome to the Bonded Podcast Foundation Series, hosted by Dr. Patty and Lizzie Shutt,
where we explore attachment healing and the bonds that shape us as children, as adults, and as parents.
We talk about the joy, the complexity, and the challenges that come with forming deep human connection.
From before conception through early childhood and far beyond.
Whether you're expecting, adopting, navigating loss, or supporting someone you love,
or simply wanting to better understand yourself and the ways your early experiences still impact you today,
these conversations are for you.
The podcast isn't just about raising secure children.
It's about healing ourselves, breaking generational cycles, and creating relationships rooted in safety, trust, and authenticity.
You'll hear from experts and parents alike on topics like fertility and perinatal loss,
adoption, returning to work,
temperaments, identity shifts,
and the emotional realities that often go unspoken.
So settle in,
take a breath,
and know that wherever you are on this journey, you're not alone.
You are not alone. Welcome back to the Bonded Podcast. Today we have a special guest that I get to spend a lot of time with. Selina Beenen. She is my supervisor. She is a licensed clinical social worker and an owner of a private practice here in Jacksonville, Beenen Therapy Group. So we're excited to have you share your story because it's very applicable to our theme of attachment and building those early bonds, and then you having your experience as a therapist too. Sharing that.
I was adopted as an infant, pretty much newborn, and shapes how I am and what I chose to do, being a psychotherapist and social work. I guess mostly because I grew up knowing that I was adopted since probably the age of 5, kindergarten, and it was I vaguely remember being told that I was adopted, didn't know what it meant. My dad actually said it in such a way that was amazing that I was chosen. So I felt very special. And then, as time went on, I started to question, where did I come from? And I'm feeling kind of should I feel abandoned? Should I feel rejected? Why was I given up? Was the theme my whole life. And just these feelings that I had would come up, especially, I guess, in the teenage years and then throughout life, adulthood. And as a child, an adopted family, I wasn't allowed to talk about it at all. I wasn't allowed to share my feelings about it. So I think I always knew I wanted to be a therapist because I was I bet there's other people that feel like I do and don't have someone to talk to. And so that's kind of why I always, went to college for psychology. It was never a doubt in my mind what I wanted to do for a living, to help others to be able to express their feelings.
Oh, wow. Thank you so much. I just also want to welcome you. And this is such an important topic for me. I feel really blessed to have you on our podcast today because I also work with many adults who are adopted. And, obviously there's not one, everyone shares the same experience, right? And I'm sure you also know that you have your personal and then you have the experience that others have shared, which maybe we can get into later if you're okay continuing on just this topic about your own personal experience. And as you reflect, because I think it's so cool to recognize that you had these positive experiences and feeling chosen and feeling special, and yet like any child, you don't have to be adopted. I think teenage years are where identity, we're starting to, there is a real separation sense of separate self and who am I? And so there's this little extra nugget of when you're adopted, it's like there is something else. And so it starts to, I can imagine, percolate into all these other questions, right? These unique questions that you shared with us, and how in fact, your parents were like told you and it felt really good to begin with. And then having this other, maybe not so pleasant experience of it not being allowed to be talked about. Okay. And whether that, do you think that, I'm just curious, was that like something really explicit that like your parents really in some ways thought they were protecting you or protecting in some way? And and sometimes, and just a curiosity of my own, could it, it could also be like where it was inferred that, oh, it's something we don't talk about. So I'm just
Yeah,
curious.
it was definitely implied, inferred that it wasn't to be talked about and not to protect me so much as like really my mom's feelings.
Okay.
Um, she was, I was hers and, my dad's, and that was that. And you are ours, and that's, and so it was just, if it ever came up, and it came up in different situations with extended family members, things like that, it was shut down pretty quick. And oftentimes my mom would get upset. And so that was why it was, that I felt like I can't talk about this because it's just going to upset my mom. I was more concerned about taking care of her feelings about it, not wanting her to feel like, I wanted to find, my biological parents, because that would have been devastating for her.
Yeah.
So I just really just didn't want to hurt her feelings. It was more about that. Not that I necessarily was, it's not that I wasn't allowed. I just felt that
Yeah.
her emotions, it just wasn't worth it to bring it up.
Which just so fits, right, with, because you were attached to her, and so she was an attachment figure, and you didn't want to disrupt that attachment. That's like, again, intuitively, children and teens, and they know, they sense, and that, so there was a protection element, but it was you really protecting in many ways your mom and your relationship with her.
I think at one point in the teenage years, so apparently a friend of hers had mentioned that, because I was going through teenage years, and had mentioned that maybe I needed to talk about it. And back then, mental health therapy, just wasn't a thing, or at least it wasn't for my family. So, when that happened, I do remember her coming to me, and she was in her way being brave enough to bring up the discussion, the conversation, and through tears, you know. And it was, I felt it was more of a, please tell me you don't want to know who your biological family is, kind of thing, instead of how do you feel about it? So it's probably why I became a therapist also, because I was taking care of my mom's feelings instead of my own. And so, kind of learned from a young age how to be an emotional caretaker.
Yeah. And yeah, I can really feel really for both of you and mom right now. And really how, I mean, it's part of the reason why I feel like I love doing this podcast and why I really, really want to continue helping people, because I feel like, on some level, everybody needs help in that system, that, you don't just, bring home the baby and everything's just peachy keen. There are these developmental stages.
Right.
And so, yeah, I can feel that even for your mom and how that might have felt for her. Even the fear of worked with many adopted adults, but also adults who have adopted, and so much how, there feels like a threat to them, right?
Yeah.
And it's understandable for sure. So wow, so makes sense. Like this already really speaks to, in some ways, you've used your experience to guide you into helping others, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm curious. I don't know if you are open to sharing, like, what helped you the most, like on your sort of journey to, open to these feelings that maybe weren't allowed at, at those stages, for you to then be able to open and process those through.
I think when I went to college and took some psychology classes, and then I went to grad school and more psychology classes, and we had to do a lot of writing about our family of origin. And so a lot of that was like processing some of those feelings that I'd never really openly been able to process before, and express that. So that was probably the beginning of some of that healing, I guess. Yeah. And then just, therapy over the last few years, really still working out. I told Lizzie I'm probably going to cry during this because I still can't talk about it without getting teary-eyed. So those feelings are just so in there and just never go away. But therapy is helping every week, each week is getting, just a little bit better toward really able to get in touch with those feelings that I've suppressed for so long, or tried to suppress for so long, because I couldn't express them as a child and teenage years. And then I, noticed that every time I mention it, I get emotional. And as a therapist for almost 30 years, like, it's still there, it's still those feelings.
Of course. I sometimes tell people to really celebrate those tears, to be like, yay, I can finally cry about this. This is, I'm allowed to, and to really celebrate that, because it's you're alive, and it shows, like, not only did you figure out that you might have needed to suppress it, okay, you've also now figured out that it's actually healthy to express it, okay, and to celebrate that you can, and let those tears kind of flow, okay, because they are part of your whole experience, and they're beautiful, really. Your feelings are like a beautiful expression of course, pain, maybe, and confusion. Like, I want to talk about how much confusion, they're like, children grow up with around this, particularly when they're not allowed to talk about it.
Yeah, it was there always confusion, anytime anything happens. So, being a child of parents who were pretty strict, there are plenty of times when I was sent to my room, and just the feeling of, I wonder if my biological family would do this, would punish me. I wonder who my biological mom was. What would it be like if I was in that family and not this family? And I love my adoptive parents. I loved them, and it was obviously all pretty typical discipline, for probably some bad behavior. But, it was like, it couldn't just be for me that it was just discipline for bad behavior. It almost always went to, anytime I got emotional about it, which, kids do, right? They cry when they get in trouble. So I would cry, but then it would turn into, I was adopted, am I even supposed to be here? Like, where should I be? I wonder what it would be like, and then the abandonment and rejection, right? So anytime there was like negative emotions, I'd be like, that feeling of, I did something wrong, typical kid, but it would turn into, it's my fault. And then, I was abandoned, I'm rejected. And I think it maybe triggered those feelings that adopted kids typically have, abandonment and rejection. When my mom was big on the silent treatment, which is withdrawal of love. And so I'd feel rejected. And so it would bring up those, all those feelings, that, I was rejected. I was given up for adoption. I was given away. Nobody wants me, kind of thing. So even though I knew that wasn't true, with my adoptive mom and dad, they loved me dearly. It was still that feeling of, there's a reason that I'm being punished, and, there's something wrong with me. They didn't want, my biological mother gave me up for adoption, and now my adoptive family is like tossing me aside.
Yeah. And I mean, it just makes sense. Like, it's like this extra lens that sort of like keeps getting naturally sort of put over it, where, I can remember growing up and, having some of those same feelings, right? Not necessarily the thoughts of, I wonder if these other parents, I sometimes, it's not really, I shouldn't joke about it, but sometimes I literally grew up thinking I was adopted. I was like, I must have been adopted. Okay. For a whole nother episode of the Bonded podcast. But I literally, like, it was a question for me, that, I think I was adopted. And, but just hearing you kind of think, like, as you went through these feelings that would be felt by many people, even with their own biological parents when they are disciplining them, and the feelings that get generated, but then how this extra piece, even can make that just more painful. And I even think, that in some ways, had you been able to, and this is a part of the work, I'm sure that therapists who are able to work with adoptive parents and adopted teens going through that stuff, is that they're able to actually talk that through and process the feelings, because those opportunities were opportunities for healing some of that and reinforcing that this has nothing to do with that.
I think most kids probably, when they're, in trouble and there's conflict with their parents, I mean, I remember my own boys like saying that I wish I had a different family. And I think that's normal, when you're not happy with your parents. But the actual, I guess, being adopted, I knew there was another family out there.
That's right.
So it was like, I wish I had another family. I do have another family, but I don't know where they are.
Right.
Totally. And then you also weren't even allowed to kind of like be curious. Like, your mom kind of put that pressure that you better not want to find out who that other family is. So you have this like internal curiosity, but you can't express it. But I am curious if there was ever anyone that you did feel safe enough to talk to about any of this or any of your feelings or thoughts.
I don't think so. I think it was, I mean, that message of, it's going to hurt my mom to talk about it was just so cemented, I feel like, that I don't remember talking about it with anyone. I had 3 older brothers. We never discussed it until 2018. A lot happened about this. But my whole childhood, I really didn't have anyone to talk to about it. There were times when, I would get in trouble and I would be upset, and I would go to the next door neighbor's house. And the Mr. White was his name, and he would just give me a big bear hug and like make me feel better. And I felt like he understood maybe what I was going through, but there still wasn't any real verbal discussion about it.
Yeah. So I'm wondering if this also has left you and created even a motivation to move you towards doing work with families or others who have been adopted.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, I love working with families with adopted children, because I mean, just my own personal experience. I get it. I know what it feels like. And oftentimes adoptive parents don't understand. They don't understand why their child feels the way they do.
Right.
Just that a little feeling of emptiness or something missing, and it's like, everyone else pretty much knows where they came from and their foundation and their,
Yeah.
family history. And so, and it comes up all the time. Like every time you go to the doctor, you have to fill out the family history medical form. I just write adopted, on it because I did, I had no information.
Right.
I think I told Lizzie too that when I did find my biological family and I went to the doctor for the first time after that, and I still wrote adopted because I'm like, it's just what I do. Like, and even though I know some medical family history now, it's just like, it's so hard to transition, if you have some reunification with biological family from how you've been for, all those years, for almost 50 years to, all of a sudden you have a biological family. It takes a long, long time to adjust your like mindset. Your mind is so
Yeah.
mapped to I'm adopted, that's it.
Yeah.
So it's interesting.
Yeah, I think, hearing your story and it's made me really connect with some very powerful, potentially even really around attachment, right? Very rooted in attachment about how humans, when they do form attachments and how profoundly important having attachment is to our survival and then our psychological kind of survival and sense of self, that there is an invisible loyalty, like there is a loyalty to them that is in many ways threatened on both sides, not just with the parents, but I've worked with many adults who, really struggle with that. Even going to meet bio parents and, feeling a sense of like protection and, both loyalty to the other person and a sense of protection because they did give them up. And it just, and all of it seems like almost, I don't like it because I feel like it's made to be almost like taboo, and the whole secret and don't talk about it, which doesn't obviously have to be that way. Like how wonderful. I have seen some families navigate it beautifully, where there really is so much open communication and openness around it. And a sense of like you have a bigger family, you're not just ours, but you belong, and that sense of belonging. And I think, again, we're dealing with like when we think about who is adopting children, part of the people who are adopting children might not be able to have their own children, right? And so when that's the motivation, okay, there's also grief and loss around that. And so much of a desire to have their own child that it makes sense for parents to want to protect and be like, no, you're mine.
Yeah.
Okay. And how that, unfortunately, I mean, even with Lizzie, I have worked very hard because I was a psychologist. I had my little schniddle, and how, people would say, oh my God, your kids, your daughter, and I would always kind of say, they're not mine. Okay. They belong to the world. Like they're not mine, and they don't belong to me. And I feel like I've always kind of worked to help my kids feel a sense of belonging beyond just me. And I wonder if that's something that even could be helpful for parents.
Yeah,
As
I
they
think so.
adopt.
I think my mom probably was like, you belong to me. And I think she was always a little scared that my biological mother might try to find me.
Okay.
And she was always threatened and had that fear. So I think that's probably why she couldn't talk about it without being
Yeah.
upfront. She always, because I know when I was adopted, I think they had 6 months or so that like a social worker had to come out and make sure everything was okay. They had back then a certain time frame that the biological parent could change their mind.
Oh, wow.
And so, yeah, I'm sure that was terrifying for her, you know.
Yes.
And she had told me in the past that um, they would come out and they saw how everything was, great, and my room was beautiful and everything's, and it was what was healthy and happy and all that. And she's like, they didn't come very long because they just shut the case. And then, I'm sure she would had encouraged them, just like, see, everything is perfect. Like, can we just close this so nobody can come get her,
Yeah.
So I know, understandable why she felt the way she did.
Of course. I mean, I totally empathize with her. I mean, again, even from like building a sense of safety, not just around taking you away from her, but like a sense of protection of, I want you, this baby, to be safe. And, she was already very much attached to you.
She couldn't
Yeah.
share.
No,
We could
no.
not share. Like, it's great to hear you say like that, Lizzie belongs to the world,
Yeah.
not just to me, because I think that would be so great for adoptive families if they could, like if I could go back and tell my mom, I am yours,
Mm,
yes, I am your daughter. I'm never going anywhere,
mm.
and I can also have other family that you're not aware of. And that's not going to take away the love I have for you, but I think she was just really, really afraid that would go
Yeah.
away.
And I
Hmm.
so understand that. Like, I really, really do feel that. And that's part of why I love working with parents who have adopted children, because I mean, we all have our own stuff, right? I mean, I have Lizzie knows well all of her mommy's stuff, right? That happens to not be one of them. Okay. And, we can't help it. Even forget about being adopted, your own bio kids. We have our own stuff that, it becomes an interplay in that relationship and how you raise them and your beliefs about the world and things like that. And how I just feel like it's difficult parenting and raising children. But then we add this other layer of potential threat that probably didn't leave your mom, even though they left her alone. I can only imagine when that gets sort of a sense of that is encoded in her, that
Hmm.
she likely continued to
Hmm.
have that fear. So,
Oh, she definitely did. At some point, I think I was in college. Um, I came home and my mom was just in tears, and I was like, "What is wrong?" And she said that someone had called her in the middle of the night, a woman, and said, "You have my daughter, and I'm coming to get her," or something like that.
Wow.
Maybe I wasn't in college yet, maybe high school, but I just remember her just being so, so, so upset. And then I remember being terrified. I think I was waiting tables at the time. And I remember going to the restaurant where I was waiting tables and being terrified because my mom said she got this phone call that someone was like looking for me. And, I was just remember that shift being so like, what if someone comes in here and says they're my biological mother? Like that is like, that was such a day full of anxiety, full of like fear and also like excitement a little bit, exhilaration, but a lot of fear of like I guess probably the way that my mom said the phone call went
yeah,
sounded more threatening
yeah.
and then the soft kindness that you would hope for.
Right. That she misses you, like wishes to meet you. And yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. But it's cool to hear that you actually are able to identify that even though there was that fear, there was still also that curiosity, and how that was there, and maybe there always, but got sort of suppressed.
Yeah, I think one of the um, feelings that I had about the curiosity of who my biological family, was, where I came from, why they gave me up, all of that, was also why aren't they looking for me? You know, especially after 18, when I became an adult, because I thought, maybe they're just waiting until I'm adult. Maybe they're not allowed to, and once I'm an adult, I wonder if they'll start looking for me then, and that never happened. And so I guess it was just kind of always, there, and that feeling, if they're not looking for me, then they don't care, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so another kind of point in your development, in your life, where it was like, oh, I'm not like chosen again,
Not wanted.
not wanted again.
Right. Right.
Yeah, you kind of made up this story. Oh, maybe it's because I need to be an adult, and then you hit that point, and
Yeah. So then the narrative that I told myself was that they didn't want to, they wouldn't want to mess up my life. They wouldn't want to disrupt. I've been with my family my whole life. They just, maybe they didn't want. I mean, I had a lot of different scenarios going on all the time, right, of what exactly was happening. But then I didn't search for my biological family either, because I didn't want to disrupt their life. So I felt, if they're not looking for me, what right do I have to go searching for them and disrupt their life? And a lot of people do have bad experiences when they, search for their biological family. So that, I think, prevented me from, searching for many years.
Bill,
Yeah. What happened?
Well, it wasn't me. I had 4 boys, and which is so cool to have a biological kid when you didn't grow up with a biological family. I was told Lizzie, everyone said they look like their dad, and I'm like, no. Can I have somebody look like me? Some features like me. I birthed this child. So I had the 4 boys, and then in August of 2018, I think my oldest was in high school or college. That would have been, he was in college. And it was my adoptive mom got pancreatic cancer, and she died really suddenly. So, 2 weeks after diagnosis.
Oh,
It
wow.
was really quickly, yeah. And that was August 2018. And then, we got through that, I got a dog for emotional support and another dog. And then Christmas, it was Christmas. And I had no idea this was happening, but my boys, on Christmas morning, I opened my gifts, and one was a jewelry box that they had made. The boys had all made together in the neighbor's backyard. I found out later, but it was wooden, and it says "Love you, Mom" on the top. And they had made this, with the little clasp and everything. I was so impressed. And I said, "Oh my gosh!" And it's a jewelry box. And they said, "Yeah, because we love you, and you loved your mom." And sorry. And so that jewelry box was to put her jewelry in that she left for me. And so this was me on Christmas morning. And then the other gift,
Yes.
I don't know how I made it through that day. The other gift was Ancestry DNA kit. Because my boys knew I was adopted. They actually didn't know until, they were probably, my oldest was probably middle school before he ever knew. My second was in middle school. I remember him specifically saying, it came up somehow, and he was like, "What?" you're adopted? Because grandma and granddaddy, my mom and dad, were grandma and granddaddy, and like they never even knew. And that is how deeply like suppressed I had it. I never even talked about it with my boys until they were older.
Yeah.
And it just happened to come up. I think they were doing like a family tree or something. And then somehow it came up, like for a school project. So anyway, I guess they decided when my mom passed away in August that, I remember my oldest said, he'd asked me once, what's on my bucket list? And I said, to travel Europe and to find my biological family. And he's like, I figured I could give you one of those.
Well, that's great.
So I got Ancestry DNA, and it took me about 2 months to finally, you have to spit into, the kit and send it in the mail. It took me like 2 months to finally do it. My boys kept asking, have you done it? Have you done it? Have you done it? And then it takes about 6 weeks before everything goes into their database and they find matches. And then once that happened and it opened up, it was crazy, like the matches, So that was really cool. And then, so long story short, had some distant cousins that were all into like genealogy and family tree and all these messages I was getting from people on Ancestry DNA, basically saying, who are you? How are you related to us? Because most of them like knew each other or of each other, right?
Okay.
But all of a sudden, I just appear like in this family DNA, and nobody knew who I was. So a couple of the distant cousins had like figured out they knew how to download all the raw data from 23andMe, Ancestry DNA, like all the and matched me with a half sister. And so I met, and she had a sister. So they grew up together, and it was my biological father's daughters. And he never knew that I existed. This was, he, I guess, had met my biological mother. And then she got pregnant, went to an unwed, like, mom's home, I guess, because of the shame of being pregnant. Had me and gave me up for adoption. And he apparently never even knew that she was pregnant or that I was born. But these two sisters were so excited to meet me. Yeah, that's been quite a journey. Yeah. It was overwhelming for me. It was very, I think that's one of the questions you had for me, Lizzie, was, even though it's exciting, sometimes it's just so overwhelming emotionally that, I think adoptive families and biological families probably should know that. My sisters have found that out over these years since then, that don't ask too much, don't tell me too much, don't, like, it's like baby steps to getting to know the story, the family. It's just too overwhelming,
Yeah. Wow. That's really important. I wonder if you could really say that again, even for listeners, because I imagine listeners will find this who either they've been adopted or they are parents who've adopted children, and how important that might be. So if you could even express that again.
Yeah. So when, first of all, even getting the Ancestry DNA kit was overwhelming. And then sending it off it's just all very frightening, right? So you don't know who's out there, who's going to be blood related. And, I had a great life, and I had a wonderful family, and I had, my husband and my 4 boys, and a great practice, being a therapist, and life is good, and everyone's happy, and it's like, it's just this fear of, is this going to blow everything up? I don't want to blow up my life, but I'm also curious. So fortunately, my sisters were determined to meet me, and because I don't know if it would have ever happened, because we first started talking and texting and sharing things, back and forth. And it was so fun and exciting. And then they were like, they live in Vegas, both of them. And they were like, let's meet. Where should we meet? And I was just avoidant of the whole discussion of meeting. And then they decided we're going to meet in New Orleans. So they booked their flights and then told me they booked their flights and sent me their flight information and the date. And I think they must have known they needed to push me because then I had to book a flight. And then my husband thought I was insane because he was like, you don't know these people, what if they're criminals? What if they're, So I went, and it was the most magical weekend of my life, Yeah. We had so much in common, same sense of humor, a lot of the same features, and that's just grown since then. So that's like 8 years ago.
Wow. Amazing.
Yeah.
Did I meet one of them? Was I?
Yes, you did.
Yes, you did.
It's coming back to me. That's so cool.
Yeah, they were here for Halloween. Yeah. Okay.
I love it. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing.
But as far as what I was saying about being overwhelmed, like they overwhelmed me in a good way. I mean, it was all great. Like they're great people. They were so loving and accepting and like excited and would just send me the sweetest messages about how happy they were that they found me. And it's just like the best blessing in the world. And like, all this wonderful stuff. And
amazing.
And I was so overwhelmed. I didn't know how to process that. I didn't understand it. Because they grew up together, they had each other. Why would they want me in their life, And then I think that goes back to probably that, narrative of my biological family has their own life. I don't want to blow that up for them, So I always felt that was going to be bad for them. And then it turns out, we found each other and it was not bad. And it was like, but there was a question of why do you love me so much? Why are you so accepting? So,
yeah, I think, just hearing you, even I'm imagining how that mix of emotion of, that curiosity, the excitement, but the fear, and how powerful always fear is, that it will tend to almost override other emotions when it's there. And it was really, pretty, not just your own fear, but it was also like in the family and in the system and all around the finding and connecting. So that fear makes sense that it was functioning for you. And in many ways wonderful that they had also excitement because it allowed you to connect. But how this other thing about how much we form identity too, just humans and our sense of self, and that here you had this opportunity in many ways to have this unbelievable expanded sense of self, but how scary that is. That sense of like, but am I going to lose aspects? And I don't want to lose that because that was my security and my sense of self and my family and all the memory. Like, and so there's that fear of, like, I think about that fear of opening up to them.
Yeah, it's interesting because they say oftentimes since day one, like, I feel like I've known you my whole life. Like, it feels like this is, there's a missing link, and it feels like I've always known you, and like, all that, and I was like, I mean, that is all so wonderful to hear, but it also like took me time to warm up to that, that they're actually like my sisters, like blood relatives, and it's okay to enjoy it because I've always been so guarded. And I feel like part of it was also the fear of rejection, so the fact that they were insistent on meeting me and having this relationship and building this relationship and all that is really has been really, really healing for that part of that, feeling rejected part, because sometimes though, I remember right after we first met, they went on a trip with each have a girl, and they were like, go on the girls trip with us, and I to San Francisco, and I was like, well, I can't do that. That's next weekend, and this was in New Orleans, and then they went on this girls trip with their two girls to San Francisco and sent me a bunch of pictures of what they were doing in San Francisco. And I felt so left out, like so left out. I felt like, see, this is validating. They have their sisterhood, their relationship. They don't need me around, And I've never told them that. So if they see this, they're going to be upset.
But they didn't want to leave you out. So that's again the power of like our own negative core beliefs. Here we are, they're like, hey, come with us, and you're like, I can't. And even though you couldn't, you could now, and maybe it's even the power of that you actually did connect with them that weekend. Okay. That there actually was a connection. Yeah. And then now you felt so it's
feel a lot
layers to that.
Yeah. I think that's just so many, adopted kids, adult kids, do get that rejection from their biological families. And that's just terrible when you have felt abandoned and rejected your whole life, knowing you're adopted, and then to have that added, another rejection. That happens a lot. So I was very blessed to be able to, have acceptance and love,
Yeah. And I just think even hearing you just say that, it is beautiful and wonderful, and it's also painful, right? That this whole process, like for them, it's really all good. Like they're experiencing it very positively. Mm-hmm. But for you, it's positive. And I teach MSC and mindful self-compassion. It makes me think of, even though this is so loving and that feeling that it's touching into places of like deep longing, okay, that are going to unearth pain and grief and all of that. And so it's mixed, and people don't understand that, right?
Yeah. It took a long time for me to be able to leave them when we're together and not cry and realize they're not going anywhere. Because every time for probably the first couple years that we'd go to Vegas, or they would come here, or we on vacations. We've done so much together in the last 8 years. It's crazy. But I would cry every time I was leaving them, because it just, I felt such a connection and attached, and didn't want to leave. I didn't want to have that loss. Yeah. But now I know they're not going anywhere, and there's plenty more visits.
Beautiful.
And my boys are so amazed that they can't believe that this has happened. They just can't believe that. They're like, they're so happy that they gave me Ancestry DNA. Yeah. And they found these. Now they have 2 aunts that adore them, and and cousins that they never knew they had. And it's just, the boys are thrilled.
Yeah. What a precious.
So grateful for them for giving me that gift at Christmas. Yeah.
Oh, so precious. I didn't know that, and I love. Oh, wow.
Yeah, your story is just so helpful, I imagine, to as many like adopted stories are all different, but you have these themes that I think are going to help listeners really feel not alone in their experience and normalize some of these emotions and core beliefs. So even though, everyone's story is different, I really appreciate you being so open and personal in this episode.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
And even just this, when you said, and I really also want to validate this and also embrace it, that in many ways, what your experience has been, there will always be aspects of, some of the pain or the sadness or the grief, and some of that is a part of it all, right? It's a part of this whole experience and how you in your life have been able to really take that into helping others. Okay. Because I can only imagine like you can deeply empathize with others.
Yeah. I do. I'm grateful that I have this personal experience to be able to empathize with others. Yeah. Whereas, not everyone really fully can understand, the deep feeling. But, so that is a blessing.
I think, there's so much more I know that we would like to unpack. And, again, this is Lizzie, I feel like it is absolutely one that we need to do a little series on, because there's so much more. I would love to do like a second episode if you're open to it, to helping us dive into some of the work that you've done with adoptive families or
she worked in foster care too, and worked with kids in that system.
Yes. So how about we do part 2? And listeners get to come back because you've, generously shared and opened your heart to share your experience. But you've also shared so many other experiences with others. And that can be kind of a part 2.
Sure.
You gotta say yes on that.
We're crying. My therapist said it would be very healing.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. Okay, I love it. I would love that, because I feel like this sort of keeps this episode very sweet and personal and special in some way. And that we can really dive into some of the work that you've done and many of the experiences, because Lizzie and I have so many questions geared towards that.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you so much for joining, and everyone tuning in. Stay tuned for part 2. Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode. If it spoke to you, it'll probably speak to someone you love too. Share it with a friend and leave us a 5-star review to help spread the message it's never too late to heal.